From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The high today here in Indianapolis, a sizzling 103 degrees. That broke a 78-year-old record. Nashville broke its all-time record, hitting 109 degrees.
The worst forest fires in Colorado ever. Deadly storms in the mid-Atlantic region kill at least 23 people, leave over 4 million without power. The Midwest suffers some of its hottest days since the Dust Bowl. More than 2,000 heat records have been broken in the past week alone. As the words extreme weather flash across TV screens across the country, what about another two words, global warming? We'll speak with meteorologist Jeff Masters of the Weather Underground, environmental reporter Suzanne Goldenberg, and Christian Parenti, author of Tropic of Chaos, Climate Change and the New Geography of Violence. Then we'll look at why bananas are more regulated than arms.
Trade in both bananas and dinosaur bones have international treaties to regulate them, but not guns. Anyone can sell guns and bullets to dictators who regularly use these arms to kill their own people.
How many guns have you got on you?
43? And how many bananas? Only 2, because it's regulated.
Russell Brand performing at Amnesty International's Secret Policeman's Ball. As the United Nations opens talks on the International Arms Trade Treaty, we'll speak with Amnesty USA's Executive Director Suzanne Nossel. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. At least 25 people have been killed and more than 50 wounded in a car bombing in the Iraqi city of Diwania. The attack targeted a crowded market. It came hours after 4 people were killed and more than 20 wounded in another bombing in the Iraqi city of Karbala. With sectarian attacks on the rise, at least 237 people were killed in Iraq last month, making June one of the bloodiest since U.S. forces withdrew late last year. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has expressed regret for the downing of a Turkish air jet that stoked tensions with neighboring Turkey last month. Speaking to a Turkish newspaper, Assad said he will not allow the incident to escalate into combat between the two countries. In other Syria news, dozens of members of Syria's opposition met in Cairo Monday to formulate a new transition from Assad's rule. Syrian rebels boycotted the gathering, calling it a potential front for foreign intervention. Syrian forces, meanwhile, continue to bombard the Damascus suburb of Douma with heavy shelling. At the United Nations, the UN's top human rights official Navi Pillay said the arming of both sides of the Syria conflict is creating a dangerous situation.
There is a risk of escalation. The provision of arms to the Syrian government and to its opponents is fueling the violence. Any further militarization of the conflict must be avoided at all costs.
In other Syria news, Human Rights Watch has released a report accusing the Assad regime of widespread torture. Human Rights Watch researcher Ola Solvang said interviews with Syrian torture victims point to a network of torture centers across Syria.
What's absolutely clear from this report is that torture is widespread and systematic. The amount of information that we have collected indicates a clear state policy and a clear tolerance of the use of torture. And really the Syrian authorities is running a network of torture centers, a network of torture chambers scattered across Syria. And the widespread and systematic nature of this network makes it clear that it constitutes a crime against humanity.
In Mexico, students took to the streets Monday to protest the election of pre-candidate Enrique Peña Nieto and called for an investigation of voter fraud. Peña Nieto's main opponent, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is still refusing to concede the race, leaving open the possibility of a court challenge. In remarks Monday, Peña Nieto pledged to continue with a crackdown against drug cartels in a drug war that's seen tens of thousands of deaths. Peña Nieto has tapped General Oscar Naranjo, the former head of Colombia's National Police, to be his security advisor, signaling he will likely continue the U.S.-backed drug war in the same vein as his predecessor, President Felipe Calderón. Naranjo helped orchestrate a U.S.-backed crackdown against cocaine trafficking in Colombia that led to the demise of drug lord Pablo Escobar. More than 47,000 people have died since Calderón took power in 2006 and announced a crackdown on drug cartels. Speaking in Washington, State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland congratulated Peña Nieto for his apparent victory and said the U.S. expects continued drug war cooperation from the Mexican government.
We're not going to get ahead of a formal seating of a new government and predict changes in policy one way or the other. But we are committed to working in partnership with Mexico to meet the evolving challenges posed by transnational criminal organizations, and we expect that that great cooperation is going to continue with the Peña Nieto administration when it is seated.
In Afghanistan, at least 3 British soldiers have been killed in a shooting by an Afghan police officer. It was the latest in a wave of attacks by members of the Afghan forces against foreign troops with the U.S.-led NATO occupation. Pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline has agreed to a $3 billion fine and a guilty plea on criminal charges in what's been described as the biggest case of healthcare fraud in U.S. history. A Justice Department-led probe found the company promoted antidepressants Paxil and Wellbutrin for unapproved uses, including marketing Paxil to children when it was only approved for adults. Prosecutors say GlaxoSmithKline promoted the drugs by distributing a misleading journal article and giving doctors perks that amounted to illegal kickbacks. Prosecutors also contend the company failed to give the Food and Drug Administration safety data about diabetes drug Avandia, which has been linked to heart risks. Deputy Attorney General James Cole unveiled the settlement Monday.
This action constitutes the largest health care settlement in United States history. We are determined to stop practices that jeopardize patients' health, harm taxpayers, and violate the public trust.
Consumer advocacy group Public Citizen said the $3 billion settlement does not go far enough because the fines pale in comparison to the drug company's profits. In a statement, Public Citizen said, quote, until more meaningful penalties and the prospect of jail time for company heads responsible for such activity become commonplace, companies will continue defrauding the government and putting patients' lives in danger. A New York judge has ordered the social media site Twitter to hand over the account details and message history of an Occupy Wall Street protester. A New York State court has called on Twitter to hand over tweets written by Malcolm Harris, a protester who was arrested with hundreds of others during the Occupy march across the Brooklyn Bridge October 1st. But Twitter had sought to avoid the order, saying it constitutes an undue burden and a violation of freedom of speech. In a statement, the American Civil Liberties Union criticized the ruling, saying, quote, do individuals give up their ability to go to court to try to protect their free speech and privacy rights when they use the Internet? The answer has to be no, they said. Twitter, meanwhile, has revealed U.S. law enforcement agencies account for the vast majority of requests for its users' private information. Of around 850 government requests for user information worldwide, 80% came from the United States. Less than a week after the Supreme Court upheld key parts of President Obama's health care law, Florida Governor Rick Scott says his state will take advantage of the court's ruling that states can opt out of the law's Medicaid expansion. The court said in its landmark decision last week that states could choose not to expand Medicaid to cover low-income people and that the federal government could not punish states by withholding Medicaid funds. Florida is the largest state so far to firmly declare it will take advantage of that ruling. Florida Governor Scott also said the state would decline to set up a health insurance exchange under the new law, opting not to provide a regulated market where people can purchase insurance. More than a fifth of Florida's residents currently lack health insurance. 3 peace activists are appearing in court today following their arrest last week outside the Hancock Field Air National Guard base near Syracuse, New York. The 3 were among 15 people jailed for protesting U.S. drone attacks Thursday, but they remain behind bars for non-compliance with their sentencing requirements under a conviction for a previous anti-drone protest earlier this year. During Thursday's action, the protesters displayed images of young victims of U.S. drone strikes as they blocked the base's main entrance. Nearly 40 protesters have been arrested in Vermont at the gates of Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Plant. Vermont lawmakers have tried to shutter the plant, but it's still in operation after its parent company, Entergy Corporation, won an extension from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and a subsequent court battle. The Vermont Yankee facility is one of the oldest in the country and has had a series of radioactive tritium leaks. On Sunday, anti-nuclear activists approached the Yankee plant with a 600-pound handmade Trojan cow-filled renewable energy devices. Organizers say they plan to launch a flotilla next month to raise awareness about the plant's polluting of the Connecticut River. The oil giant Shell has obtained what critics are calling a protest-free zone around a drilling vessel set to begin operations off Alaska's Arctic coast later this month. The U.S. Coast Guard has granted Shell's Noble Discoverer vessel a 500-meter safety zone that no demonstrators will be allowed to enter. The environmental group Greenpeace says it plans to defy the restrictions despite the threat of penalties. Shell's bid to begin exploratory drilling in the Arctic was approved last month over the objections of indigenous and environmental groups. A Singapore physician and peace activist who's been working in Afghanistan has been denied permission to enter the United States. Dr. Wee Tek Young of the Afghan Peace Volunteers has been invited to speak on an anti-war caravan across the United States beginning in September. But last week, U.S. consular officials in Singapore denied Dr. Young's visa request. The group Voices for Creative Nonviolence is urging supporters to protest the move. And the psychiatrist and gay rights advocate Dr. Richard Isay has died at the age of 77. Dr. Isay came out as a gay man as a married father in his 40s and went on to lead a pivotal effort to stop his profession and the American Psychiatric Association from treating homosexuality as a disease. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and